This is the best science fiction horror book you will ever read in your entire life. And I can tell you that after reading it, it's not just the best science fiction horror book. This book that I just read is now entered within my top 5 favorite horror books of all time, and easily in my top 3 favorite horror short story collections that I've ever read. This book is utterly fantastic with the level of creativity that it has, the level of imagination and vivid detail that Tim Curran puts into his settings and creature features, as well as just these extraterrestrial story ideas that he manages to pump out. You also got absolutely terrifying scenes with good tension, good atmosphere, and openly explicit gore, body horror, you name it. So yeah, Tim Curran is back once again. I had to wrap up my little trinity of Tim Curran reviews because this is going to be the last book that I cover for him in a while. I'm obviously going to return to my GOAT for a little bit, but I just got on a little mini binge reading some of his stuff, and I am thoroughly happy. Again, this is an absolutely fantastic book, and I'll say it, this is easily up there as the best science fiction horror you will read, and just great science fiction in general. So if you like that type of stuff, if you like scary alien stories and thinking about extraterrestrial threats that get under your skin, this dude hit the nail. So without further ado, let's get into the review because there's 12 stories that I gotta cover, and I'm excited to pretty much talk about all of them. And by the way, 4 of the stories out of these 12 basically ended up getting a 10 out of 10 perfect score, which I believe is around 33%. So yeah, pretty impressive. Let's start off with number 1, the first story in the bunch, which is The Black Ocean. The Black Ocean is about a group of space voyagers, astronauts from the future, who basically end up getting into a shipwreck, and their ship ends up crashing down onto this exoplanet where they have to make an emergency landing. This exoplanet ends up being basically an ocean exoplanet. It is completely covered in this ginormous black ocean with this thick yellow fog and mist that basically covers it up in a giant blanket to the point that you can't see more than 20 meters out in front of you if you're looking down from surface level. There's also no landmass, so you're completely trapped on a life raft with these space voyagers as they're trying to figure a way out and trying to find some land or area that they can get down on. They see this misty black ocean. They also see these large patches of seaweed, which is the closest thing you can get to landmass, and they notice that there is something out there which seems to be tracking them. That's right, on the sonar equipment, as they're trying to keep their composure and try to stay calm, they see this large blue blip that basically keeps rising up and going away, almost as if there's something that's rising from the depths of the ocean up, trying to scout them out and then going back down. Initially, they think it's a landmass because this sonar reader that they have cannot determine between inorganic material and organic material. And seeing that it's 150 meters long and 30 meters across, one would only imagine it to be some sort of hidden landmass. That is, until they see it getting closer and closer, and they realize that, yeah, this is actually a life form, a gigantic super predator of this ocean that is now honing in towards them. By the way, to put it into perspective, 150 meters long means that this thing is as long as 5 blue whales, 1.5 football fields, and its width is 1 blue whale long. So yeah, this thing is an absolute behemoth and titan, whatever may be coming their way. And of course, things end badly. Not going to talk about it more than that because this is the shortest story out of this collection of 12 stories. But yeah, things get into some action and some horrific things unfold as they eventually do see what is responsible for approaching them on the sonar. Now, this story surprised me because the setting of this exoplanet that they're on is pretty much identical to the setting of the Dead Sea, which is one of Tim Curran's most famous novels that he's made. Matter of fact, the gigantic predator they run into is actually a creature that is very similar to a creature that you meet, one of the creatures out of the many that you meet in the Dead Sea novel, except here it's scaled up in proportion of size. I have a theory that this was a predecessor, him leading up to making that Dead Sea novel, so this is sort of a prototype to that. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. It was good, to the point, kind of like a punchline story. Definitely enjoyed it, but I've seen similar stuff like this before, so I couldn't give it a bigger score. I've experienced the Dead Sea novel, so this is all sort of typical Align stuff. But the Predator, despite being similar to the other one, it being scaled up made it quite terrifying, and when they encounter it, yeah, Jaws ain't got shit on this thing. Story number 2 in the book is absolutely fantastic, and it's one called Heat Seeker. Heat Seeker is again with a bunch of space voyagers. This time they're ones that live on Mars, and they're taking care of the subterranean stations that are in charge of mining the different materials ore that are within the planet. Obviously, because a bunch of different giant corporations and government are using it to try to extract some resources. It opens up with a very brutal scene because one of their crewmates basically is in an absolutely vicious mauling where a guy basically had ran up to go and try to save him or try to figure out what was wrong with him. And he saw that this guy was completely torn apart. I mean, his stomach ripped open, sliced apart in pieces, almost as if something with giant scissors or scythes had cut him open. And because it's Mars with lower gravity and absolutely sub-freezing temperatures, his blood is actually crystallized and his body parts are kind of floating in suspended animation as the rest of the crewmates basically find him and try to figure out what was responsible. The traumatized guy who tried to reach him is covered with the smelly black substance and describes how there was some silhouette, some black thing that was bounding up this subterranean canyon and basically running away after it committed this atrocity. They initially think that he might be going a little bit loony, but seeing the evidence, there's no denying that something horrible happened. So the crewmates have to perform an emergency evacuation from the subterranean station and now go to the next one in a nearby valley. And unfortunately, they cannot call for emergency rendezvous contact because here, with spaceships, these spaceships out nearby this planet are basically delivering materials to other planets and other colonies. So if one of the ships comes to basically do an emergency landing, there's going to be a colony out there starving for months. So these guys are basically isolated on the desolate planet of Mars with something horrific targeting them. As they're walking through this red frozen desert, they then see this giant 5 to 6 inch rhombus-like footprint with spurs on either side digging holes. And they then start talking about this urban legend on Mars, this Martian boogeyman that was basically brought up whenever colony members on Mars had gone missing and expedition mining crews had gone missing without a trace as well. Stories circulated about something called the Heat Seeker, a creature which basically hunts you down based off your heat signature and basically made a bunch of people disappear. And although the leader of the crew did not believe it, now seeing what happened to one of their crewmates and seeing that they're basically getting targeted and hunted by some type of presence that they can't explain, they start raising their awareness. And soon, who knows, there might be more to that urban legend than one might expect. And they do start getting hunted by something very ominous, very terrifying, with some absolutely horrific mechanics as they head down to the subterranean valley, go through the tunnels, where now they're going to start getting picked off one by one. This story is fantastic. The urban legend of this Martian type of boogeyman called the Heat Seeker is great. You got vivid descriptions of absolutely horrific gore, people getting ripped apart, sliced open. There's a scene where a bunch of crewmates are inside of these subterranean tunnels, and this thing that's hunting them, the Heat Seeker, has the ability to mimic human speech in a very distorted, reality warping way. And they start hearing various different people screaming to them from inside of these dark tunnels, and they sound like they're being all skinned alive and a giant orchestra of just horrific, ear-piercing noise. This thing is almost like a death siren luring them in, and they find out about the thing's purpose, what it's capable of, and when you actually meet this urban legend in the flesh, or whatever it's comprised of, it is jaw-droppingly horrific. And the ending to the story is a little bittersweet, but overall it's amazing. I'd give this one a 10 out of 10. The third story is called Flypaper. This one is about some space voyagers that are on this empty, desolate planet very, very far, light years away, 45 light years away from the nearest civilization, Earth and colonies and stuff like that. And it's a giant desert full of giant sand dunes, so no real living organism or life there outside of like microorganisms and stuff. So that makes it very terrifying when a expedition shuttle of space voyagers basically sees this what seems to be a couple miles long giant black box that somehow landed on top of these sand dunes. They debate if this is some old relic or something that maybe some extraterrestrial or higher life had dropped off. Again, it is a glassy black obsidian, just perfectly geometrical rectangle. It's almost like a giant shoebox that is, again, miles long. And they find out that it's somehow some working mechanism or machine because these entrances start opening up to it. And the people who are investigating this thing end up getting drawn in by some unknown force. When they do, they start navigating through a crazy tunnel, a maze of different passages through this giant object. And it seems to have some sort of equation that is picking them off one by one like vermin. One lady basically runs into a mousetrap kind of mechanism that crushes down on her waist, and her intestines, organs, and inner basically guts ends up flying through her mouth as she instantly dies and gets pressed down. You also have another guy who basically is starving, wanting to get some food, and as he starts imagining all this different food that he could eat, just like the food that his mom used to make for him back when he was on Earth, all that food starts to materialize. However, when he starts eating it, he eventually gets injected with some type of crazy poison that starts making him pump out yellow foam, start convulsing and basically snapping his limbs and instantly dying on the spot. It's then realized that this box, this mechanism, this machine basically has a way of basically manifesting their desires and wishes within the moment and bringing out their animalistic instincts and then preying upon them one by one. And you keep getting various different occurrences that happen as people start facing very, very horrific deaths. And you start to find out the nature of this box and essentially what is a giant flypaper trap except for human life. And this one is very good. I would give Flypaper an 8.5 out of 10. The box machine is very interesting in the way it works. You get some very brutal gore and deaths within the crew members that enter within this machine. And the equation, the ideology behind how it works is very interesting. Kind of plays into the idea of higher intelligence and higher beings with extraterrestrial life and how humans can sometimes just be mice within an experimental maze to them. So yeah, I enjoyed this one quite a bit. It gets a very good. The next one is another absolutely fantastic story, and this one is number 4, called Migration. Migration opens up with, again, a group of space voyagers, these researchers who are on top of this scorching hot planet that is covered all the way in a giant sea of long living grass. That's right, this entire planet is scorching hot, 90 degrees to 120 degrees in the bearing hot desert-like sun, and there is just waves of tall grass up to your waist, up to your chest, even higher, several feet above you, just extremely tall, and it's endless. There is no other structures or basically like land masses or terrain. It's just a giant sea of long grass that is living. It's able to move. It lives off nutrients in the ground. And these guys who are investigating the different headquarters and research that they're doing about the planet start hearing this loud, locust-like chittering sound that gets under their skin. They hear it periodically through this ocean of long grass wherever they're walking, and almost feel like there's something within the grass that's moving through and tracking them at all times. As they start basically ignoring it the best that they can and trying to get to a local headquarters, when they do get to this station and try to meet up with some of their crewmates and employee co-workers, those guys have faced brutal deaths. The station is basically ravaged and torn apart. A lot of the hardware and gear is ripped up, and they see that one of their crewmates has seemingly faced a very brutal death because he is completely like wide-eyed and dead. He's got this discolored froth coming out of his mouth. His body has seemingly contorted and snapped in a bunch of different places. His waist section is basically folded like origami. A 30-degree angle snapped his spine, and it almost seems like he's been attacked by like nerve gas or something. It's just crazy the way that his brutal death looks in front of these guys. And as they start investigating some bodies, they see and hear some movement out in the grass and hear this chittering noise again. And that's when one of them tries to go investigate, try to go on one of the beaten paths that they've carved with automatic lawnmowers through this grass. And as he starts moving, the other guy who's waiting back by the headquarters hears him start screaming. And that's when he runs out to the grass, trying to locate the source of this noise and where his friend has gone. He then meets with his friend and sees his friend covered by several giant, oversized alien ants or wingless wasps. They're 8 to 10 inches long, brightly coral colored with like bright oranges and reds, and they are stinging this man repeatedly with the stinger, and he just starts convulsing and going crazy. It looks like he's been hit by nerve gas, and the same type of death that followed the dead body in the headquarters is now happening to him in live time. His bones start snapping, his eyes start rolling in the back of his head, and he starts going crazy. He starts frothing at the mouth, and next thing you know, he drops dead as more of these things start piling on top of him and just stinging him to death. The other guy runs away and gets to another headquarters where there's a bunch of crew members, and this guy actually managed to kill one of this 8 to 10 inch long alien insects and bring it back to a biologist researcher guy at the station to kind of dissect and figure out. They examine its anatomy, they find out how it's got some nerve gas type of toxin it can inject you with, and they soon realize that they have to fortify themselves in this headquarters station because all across this planet is a migratory swarm of these insects, and not just hundreds, not just thousands, but millions of them that are on a migratory path through this tall grass, miles long, that is heading straight towards the path of this headquarters station. So these things are on the move, and they have the capability of just killing as many people and populations as they need to. So these guys decide that they have to fortify their bunker, throw up force fields, electrical fields, and basically barge themselves in airtight as they prepare for this swarm of millions of insects coming towards them. And as the story goes on, they start figuring out more about these things. Are they intelligent? What type of features and abilities do they have? What type of hive mind do they operate in? And you find out more about these things, but not in a research way, as they start basically applying these things to their victims, which are the people fortified within this headquarters. The climax of the story is absolutely action-packed and horrific. It'll make your skin crawl. It'll make you cringe in a good way. It is violent. It is crazy. It is absolutely mind-numbing, the level of shit going on and shit that hits the fan. And yeah, the story gets a 10 out of 10. It was amazing. I love the creatures featured in it. I love the idea of the story. I love how the planet terrain basically played into the story. And the ending was pretty crazy because yeah, we are not shit compared to some extraterrestrial threats out there, especially when they belong to the imaginative mind of Tim Curran. Number 5 is a story called Dead Planet. This one was okay, basically about a bunch of space voyagers who again crash land on this kind of frozen, eerie planet, and they discover this abandoned, kind of ruined city with various different weird geometric structures. They get to this giant mausoleum type of area where there's like a bunch of these honeybee type of hive comb things, and inside of each are these weird, freaky looking spider, scorpion, alien creatures. They're all long dead, but they don't understand the complexity of this building. And then some, I guess, supernatural stuff kind of happens, and then the ending to the story is kind of just a blue ball. That one was okay. Kind of felt a little bit repetitive and a little bit all over the place, and I kind of felt like that blue ball at the end really stuck it for me because you didn't really get to figure out what was going on or what the threat was. So yeah, that one was okay. I still like some of the stuff in it, but nothing to make it stand out, so 6.5 out of 10. It was okay. Number 6 is a story called The City of Frozen Shadows. This one is basically about the sole lone survivor on planet Earth, because what happened was Earth tried to use this I don't know how you say it, hyperspace communication system to kind of reach out to potential alien life out there within our galaxy. And they did manage to contact some race, and this race ended up being very hostile, called the Stygons. And the Stygons had sent out a plague to Earth, which basically ended up taking out 2/3 of the population before they arrived. And then they started using their capabilities, their technology, their advanced forms to basically take over Earth, start killing people, and they have a very interesting way of using humans because they can turn humans into what's called hunters. They basically kill humans and turn them into mind-controlled puppets. They basically have their eyes start glowing green, their skin turning super pale, and they start acting like android, robotic zombies that start hunting down human life. So this guy, the only survivor left after his wife died, is basically trying to survive these hunters, trying to survive the Stygon's technology, and trying to remain as the last living guy on Earth to very troubling circumstances because, yeah, he's basically pinned down against a very powerful threat and outnumbered. So you see how he navigates the world. I give that one an 8 out of 10. It was good. I liked hearing about some of the Stygon technology, this end of the world alone sort of situation, very dystopic. And the hunter concept was pretty cool. There's some other things in the story that I leave out towards the climax, of course, for no spoilers. But yeah, this was a fairly good one, so I enjoyed it. Number 7 is one called The Ghost Ship. And this one is about a space shuttle which basically ends up flying through space, and by a local asteroid belt, I believe, they end up finding this abandoned derelict of a spaceship that was known as the Krakoa. The Krakoa is pretty infamous amongst people, the agency, and corporation because there's been many expedition teams that were sent out to go retrieve it. The team that was on this ship basically disappeared and went missing out of nowhere, and all expedition research and retrieval teams that have gone there have disappeared without a trace as well. So this space shuttle ends up getting curious by it. They end up getting lured in. And as they go in there and start investigating, the head captain enters within a room after all of his crew members have fanned out. And in this room, he sees 2 dead bodies within spacesuits. When he goes up to one of the dead bodies, he sees that the face inside of the astronaut's visor belongs to his right-hand woman that is currently on the ship patrolling it. This obviously freaks him out, and then when he goes up to the next corpse, which is on a table, it carved into the table with a knife saying, "Get out while you can, get out while you can." And when he looks into the visor of this one, he sees the dead corpse of himself, and he realizes that something very weird, very Twilight Zone-y is going on. As he goes back with his crew members and tries figuring out a plan, one of his crew members describes that this basically abandoned derelict ship was thought to be collided with a meteor, but it was not. It had collided with an extraterrestrial, long cylindrical type ship, and when they had entered the ship, according to the logs that they have here, the diary logs, that ship was completely hollow and empty except for a levitating floating sphere. And it turned out that this levitating floating sphere was actually a prison container for an extra-dimensional entity that was very predatory and harmful to the galaxy. And soon it broke free and ended up entering within this now abandoned derelict. This entity is basically able to warp physics, warp geometry, and warp time anywhere that it goes because it is of a different dimension. And that's why the captain saw those Twilight Zone things happening in the ship. And he realized that as this thing is passing by and hunting down the crew members now, it's able to distort time. What feels like 20 minutes passing ends up being 2 days passing. And these guys have no way to deal with this thing as its horrific capabilities are shown, and they start getting picked off one by one. This one was really interesting about it being a prisoner ship with this extra dimensional entity. I love seeing how it affected the ship in a Twilight Zone type of way because of its mechanics, and its form is quite disturbing, its capabilities are quite disturbing, and yeah, this was a really creepy and good one. So this was a very good story. I'm gonna give it an 8.5 out of 10. Number 8 is called The Killing Jar, which is about a space voyager group. I feel like I've kept repeating that, but it is a story about extraterrestrials. This space voyager group has their space shuttle collide with the meteor, and all their system functions go down, so they now have to stay put and survive as they send out distress signals. And next thing you know, this absolutely humongous spaceship appears before him. It is 10 miles long and a couple miles wide and basically swallows them whole inside of it. As they escape their broken up ship and go inside of this alien one and start navigating it, it is humongous and very complex and abstract. They start navigating through the maze and its tunnels. They then enter this room, which is full of these floating gelatinous sort of abstract body bags that have hundreds of thousands of specimens in them, including various different reptiles, mammals, fish from Earth. You also have chimera creatures, squid-like aquatic monstrosities, other high-tech like alien and races and stuff that are from different planets, and they're all being collected within the ship for some type of research reason. Of course, the crew starts getting red flags and getting paranoid because they have experience with many different alien species, and they've learned across all these years of research and space exploration that a lot of them are predatory. They often have malintentions towards humans, using them as cattle, livestock, killing, food, nourishment, whatever. And they realize that they might be getting into one giant science experiment, as some very high-level aliens are now involved in studying them. So yeah, this one was pretty brutal with some of the deaths. The concept was really cool. Some of the imagery was very disturbing and abstract, and really makes you feel small as a human. And some of the things that is encountered by some of these guys involving a certain scene at the climax is quite horrific. Some existential horror, and really makes you think out there. So this one I give a 9 out of 10. This was a great story. Number 9 is another fantastic story called Graveyard, basically about this spaceship who has gone down to this very dark, desolate planet. This is a giant planet that's covered in so much ash, and it has basically a lunar cycle that means that permanent night is going to be there for 3 weeks long, and they have to go down to this colony of 2,000 who basically had disappeared because there's no more drones or officers that are able to investigate it. So they decide to go down there and head down to this very dark, desolate planet, trying to find out why this colony of people had disappeared. They start navigating through this abandoned, derelict, haunted-looking city, and they see all these just giant blizzards and piles of ash, and they realize that there's no human life there. And that's when they start putting 2 and 2 together, that the ash is in fact the remains of the colony that used to live here. When they start investigating the various different buildings and abandoned places here, eventually they get to one section where other crewmates of theirs who have separated and split off start screaming hysterically in pain and feel like they're being attacked by something. The main character then flashes his helmet light over by a building and sees what looks like to be described as turning over a rotten log and thousands of ants flying through. There are thousands of organisms that are skittering around at rapid speed, trying to get away from the light because they are allergic or hate it. When him and his colleague try to escape through a building and trying to find one of their crewmates, he then puts his light down by an open corridor and sees what looks to be like an alien toad or frog. It's got long, bony, segmented limbs. It's got a stout, fat, glistening mucus body. It's got almost a conical head, and it's got these 3 glowing eyes and an oval mouth with a bunch of hooked teeth like a lamprey. He then finds out that there is a swarm of creatures here on this planet that might have been responsible for the colonists going away. And when they finally meet up with another one of their crewmates who got separated, they see 8 to 9 of these things basically dogpiling on top of him and sucking the life away from him. And in fact, that guy is having some acidic effect because his skin and his suit and his flesh are all burning and sapping away. The guy even smashes 2 of these organisms into a wall, and they explode into this bright green mucus-like jelly that basically disintegrates them down into ash. Yeah, that's what happened to all those colonists. You then get an absolutely fantastic, bonker, batshit crazy climax scene, a little similar to the story called Migration that I covered, except this one has completely different creatures, completely different dynamics. You have the whole idea of them being scared of the dark and how that plays a factor into this story. And there's even a scene that is similar to Rainy Season by Stephen King. Not going to say what that is, but if you know what I'm talking about, yeah, and the story only gets crazier from there. So this one was also absolutely fantastic. I give it a 10 out of 10. Really haunting, really scary, gets under your skin. Another giant swarm story, but the mechanics of how they work and how this world played a factor was really interesting and cool. Again, the brilliant mind of Tim Curran. Number 10 is the creepiest story in the book, and it's called No Life on Mars. This one basically tells a story about how all the colonies and people on Mars had died away because this basically extraterrestrial virus had infected them, caused a pandemic, and they all died. And as they managed to get one man who they tried to do a cure for in a controlled area on Earth, all these other population and peoples were getting affected. And as they tried to escape on ships and try to get back to Earth, that was a danger. So those ships were were shot down and exploded, all their vehicles were crippled, and they exercised martial law to basically close off this planet to itself and make it desolate. By the time that guy came back and he had the cure with him, everybody was dead, including his beloved wife. So he basically tours around Mars all to himself. He lives in a shack. It's very desolate, very somber. And as one day he's in the city in one of his abandoned restaurants that he liked to go to, the phone starts ringing and he thinks that he's hallucinating. There's no way that a phone can be ringing because he's the only man alive on this entire Mars planet. But when he goes to pick up the phone, he hears what sounds like a wind and he hears breathing. And when he's about to put it down after nobody answers his calls, he hears what sounds like a muted giggling. He starts getting very uncomfortable and paranoid. He feels like something out there in Mars is watching him, either from these abandoned city buildings or out there in the desert. And as he runs back to his shack and gets there, he has an odd feeling that something has entered the shack and basically moved things around. And he doesn't have any signs or concrete evidence behind it. He just starts getting into madness and paranoia until he gets to his computer system, which is turned on, and it basically repeats several times nonstop, "You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone." He then starts losing it and definitely feeling like something is watching him, and he camps out in his bedroom with a 50 cal, and one day at night when he's looking out at his window, he sees a horrific sight. He sees a pale white face grinning ear to ear with bright pink lips and an absolutely just maniacal, comical smile, and absolutely black pupilless eyes staring back at him viciously, and it ducks under the window and starts scratching at his door, and that's when he loses it. He eventually musters up the courage to go into town and start investigating. He's heard stories on Mars about how there used to be an ancient race that died out, tens of thousands of years ago. The original Martians, which built a lot of these cities that are now left as like abandoned ruins. And it's said that the ghost of those Martians are still around. So he's not sure if that plays into an urban legend or something. But while he's out at the abandoned main city called New Providence, he definitely starts seeing something lurking through the buildings and tracking him. And eventually he ends up picking up another phone call that's meant for him. And as he starts screaming maniacally, trying to find out who this is, because he suspects that it might be either something extraterrestrial, something supernatural, or maybe it's another person who survived this pandemic and has now been driven into insanity. Either options are scary to him. And as he's on this phone call screaming, he hears that muted giggling, he hears that laughing, and finally when he's about to hang up, he hears a voice talk to him. And the voice basically tells him, "I think you know who this is." And that's as far as I'm going to go with that story. This one was super creepy, really got under my skin, absolutely terrifying. And there's some twists that come later in the story, some really horrific sights that'll scar you and make you kind of look around the dark corners of your room. So yeah, this was a great one. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Number 11 is called Charno World, and this is basically Tim Curran's version of The Predator. There is a planet called Xenos, which is basically this giant tropical swamp jungle filled with a bunch of killer wildlife and absolutely just unlivable conditions. And there is a biologically superior, ultimate evolved super predator of the galaxy called xenoids, which are alien life forms that basically hunt down all living organisms, kill them, and basically collect their heads and body parts as trophies. You even hear stories about how one had ended up sneaking on a colony ship and then ended up killing like 70 plus people in a matter of 36 hours. So this especially becomes hair-raising as you find out that there was a colony ship who had accidentally crash landed on top of this planet Xenos because it was a pleasure kind of cruise ship. And they normally have banned anybody going to Xenos because of how dangerous it is. The agency has made it prohibited and give life in prison to anybody who goes there. However, there is a group of mercenaries who are now landing on top of this planet. That is because there was a daughter of a famous billionaire from Earth who basically was on this cruise ship that had landed. So he's basically desperate to find his daughter. And since no government or agency or corporation figure is allowed to go there, he has to hire a group of mercenaries, expendables, to go through this tropical jungle planet and try to find them before the xenoids find them. I'm showing the cover of the book here because this is actually a scene. This is a scene and representation of this specific short story. So yeah, these mercenaries go through the jungle. Amazing descriptions of the terrain and the various different killer wildlife. And this thing in the cover is in fact the Xenoid. And you find out how vicious and terrifying it is with its own biological traps, weapons, capabilities, and things. So yeah, you see this mercenary group start getting picked off one by one and feeling the terror of the Xenoid, Tim Curran's own version of Predator. I give this one a 9.5 out of 10. It's an amazing story, very well written, very action-packed, very scary, amazing creature feature, and great descriptions of them running into this thing, the various different wildlife, the vicious way that they die, even one scene where there's like a giant scarecrow that is the exoskeleton that this creature shed off and tried to scare him with. So a lot of good stuff. And the only reason it's not a perfect is because it's kind of like a ripoff of The Predator, but the way Tim Curran wrote it and made it, it's still great. And finally, the last story in this book, number 12, is called Stowaway, and this one's fantastic. Again, another perfect 10 out of 10. This one is basically about a group of space voyagers on a ship getting very bored as they study asteroids and try to collect geo samples, and a very weird occurrence happens as 5 of this exposition team goes on this asteroid, and a researcher on this ship basically pulls aside the first officer and shows him camera feed of the asteroid. It shows that 5 people went out to collect samples, but 6 people came back into the ship. So yeah, they picked up an extraterrestrial straggler who happens to be the extraterrestrial intergalactic version of a space vampire. In this case, it's a single-celled amoeba, a absolutely evolved level being that is able to shapeshift, turn into all different inorganic and organic material, gas, liquid, solids, you name it. And it starts basically impersonating crew members and starts picking off victims one by one in very horrific ways and draining them of their blood. And oh my god, this thing is absolutely terrifying. The tension in this story is great. It is the longest story in the entire book, but it is a fantastic high-tension read. And there's a lot of fantastic scenes, homages to Earth vampires, which may or may not have been inspired by extraterrestrial threats as hinted by this story. And yeah, the conclusion was fantastic. Actually ends on a little bit of a comedic sweet note, but overall, absolutely perfect. I'd give that one a 10 out of 10. So that is my longer coverage of this entire book, but it's worth it because it's one of the best horror books I ever read, one of the best alien science fiction horror books I ever read, and it was an absolutely amazing joy to read. Tim Curran is one of the best horror authors out there. Creature feature, ocean stories, alien stories, you name it. It's his forte. He does a fantastic job. And although there were some similarities between these stories, they had a nice variety. They had high levels of creativity, absolutely fantastic scenes. And even during my review, I won't be able to do it justice. So please go pick it up and read it. Otherwise, I'm going to have to lock you up in a basement and do Chinese water drip torture with you, except with yellow Kool-Aid, the worst Kool-Aid flavor, until you pick up this book and read it. That's all I got for today. I'm going to give this book a 10 out of 10. I'll see you till the next time, and watch out for what may be lurking in the night sky. Deuces.